I remarried Mark, who had been divorced once, and for the past 3 years, I've been dealing with his self centered mother. One day, his mother, Susan, mentioned she felt lonely eating alone, so Mark promised to go to her place to cook dinner. When Mark was busy, I would invite his mother over to our home, and the three of us, my daughter Rachel included, would eat together. However, after these meals, Susan started complaining of stomach pain and nausea. It only happened when I invited her over. We took her to the hospital for tests, but nothing abnormal or any illness was found. The doctor in charge, Lily, who was a high school classmate of mine, was someone I completely trusted, both for her skill and her personality. Eventually, even Rachel started experiencing similar symptoms. Again, there was no known cause. After Rachel's second episode, Lily called me into a separate room after her examination. She told me,
You need to get divorced and leave right away. When I examined Susan, I found out that
the words that followed were so shocking, I could hardly believe my ears. I clenched my fists tightly and bit my lip to hold back the overwhelming anger surging through me. Susan, you better brace yourself. My name is Abby, and I'm a 46-year-old housewife. I've been married to Mark, whom I met at a local singles event, for 3 years now. Mark's kind and gentle nature made me feel comfortable, and we shared hobbies like reading and watching movies, which made us click. I was thrilled when he asked me out, but I hesitated to pursue our relationship when I found out he was divorced and had a 3-year-old daughter. My parents and friends warned me, remarrying someone with a kid can be tough. But while I was hesitating, all of my friends and colleagues got married. By then, most of the eligible men were either divorced or had kids. After a few dates, I decided to meet Rachel, and she turned out to be the sweetest little angel. Looks like Rachel liked me. As we continued going to amusement parks and restaurants together, I became quite fond of her as well. Susan was also very lively, and when I went to introduce myself before our wedding, she welcomed me with a bright smile. For someone like me, who had all but given up on marriage, it felt like a dream to become the mother of such a lovely girl. And since I got along well with Susan, I felt relieved. Our blissful married life began, and my heart was full of excitement. Mark's father passed away 10 years ago, and since then, Susan had been living alone in the family home. Mark, is there any talk of your mom moving in with us? I cautiously asked after we got married. He casually replied,
No, Mom likes living on her own and doing her own thing. I think that's best too.
Is that so? I felt relieved, and Mark continued.
Since she lives just 10 minutes away by car, I can rush over if anything happens.
Indeed, Susan seemed to enjoy her independence, taking trips with friends from the neighborhood and enjoying her gardening hobby. Thanks to that, we didn't have to worry about unannounced visits and were able to maintain a decent distance. During Thanksgiving, Christmas, Rachel's birthday, and long weekends, we would visit her at her place, or she would come to our apartment. When Mark was away for work, Susan would sometimes watch Rachel while I took care of chores. One day, after finishing the dishes, I peeked into the living room and they were both gone. I checked the other rooms, but they were nowhere to be found. Rachel had been whining all morning about wanting to go to the park, but since the weather was bad, I had her play indoors instead. Perhaps Susan overheard and decided to take her out. I looked out the window and felt a chill run down my spine. It was still early afternoon, but snow was starting to fall. Did she really take Rachel outside without telling me in this weather? Nervously, I stepped out onto the balcony and looked down. Sure enough, there were people in the park. I quickly threw on my coat, grabbed Rachel's and rushed out the door. As soon as the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, I heard Rachel crying and dashed toward the park. There she was, sitting by the swings, crying with a cut on her forehead. "Rachel, are you okay? Did you fall off the swing? Where did your grandma go?" I knelt on the snow-soaked ground, pulled Rachel into my arms, and frantically spoke to her, but all she could do was cry harder.
Oh dear, that's my poor girl.
I looked up at the leisurely voice and saw Susan standing at the entrance of the park. She was standing there, holding a cup of coffee and hot chocolate, staring blankly at us, and I felt a surge of anger. I couldn't help but shout, "You left a 4-year-old alone to buy drinks?"
Well, it's colder than I thought. Rachel said she wanted to go to the park, but I didn't think she'd fall off the swing.
Her words made it seem like it was Rachel's fault, and I couldn't hold back my irritation. "First of all, don't take her out without asking me. It's freezing, and you didn't even put a coat on her. I can't believe this."
You're overreacting. Kids are resilient. They should play outside, even in winter. Moms these days are way too overprotective.
I shot back. "It's below freezing. Of course I'm worried." I hurried out of the park and she asked me in frustration,
Where are you going?
"We're going to the hospital. Just go home for today."
She just has a bump and a small cut. And here I was, spending time with my granddaughter. The least you could do is thank me.
She yelled angrily, but I ignored her and made my way to the car. After seating Rachel in the back and buckling her in, I watched as Susan drove off in her small car. At the hospital, the x-ray showed it was just a bruise, and I was relieved. Rachel got 3 stitches for the cut, and I took her home. Later, when Mark got back from work, I angrily recounted the whole ordeal. He was stunned but apologized on his mom's behalf, which helped calm me down a little. Since the incident, Susan hasn't visited as often. However, after a while, Susan started calling me over to her house at my usual time off work more and more often.
My computer suddenly stopped working. I cleaned the vent fan, but now I can't put the parts back together. I want to clean the AC filter, but I can't take it out. Abby, can you help?
Even though she had a cell phone and could easily look up solutions herself, she dumped everything on me. "Susan, I have to pick Rachel up from daycare soon." I would gently hint that it would be difficult for me to go, but she never understood.
I know that, so just fix it before you go. You're good at this, Abby. You'll finish quickly, right?
"If it's so easy, why don't you do it yourself?" I thought. "I'll let Mark know when he gets home, so can you wait until then?"
No, Mark is busy at work. I can't bother him with this.
But I'm exhausted too, juggling work, house's chores, and raising Rachel. She didn't want to inconvenience her son, but didn't care about her daughter-in-law. That's how it is, right? The thought boiled my blood. Still, if I pushed back too much and caused tension, it might affect how she treats Rachel. In the end, I always gave in. "Okay, I'll come, but only for 30 minutes.
Don't worry, Abby. You'll be done in 5. I really appreciate it.
When these calls started happening nearly every week, it wore me down. I even complained to Mark, and he talked to Susan about it, but she wouldn't listen.
Mom says she's relying on you, Abby. She told me that unlike my quiet ex-wife, you're dependable, and she feels secure with you around.
Well, it doesn't feel like that to me. No matter how I looked at it, she was just using me. But the tipping point came when she called me 3 times in a single week. It made me so late picking up Rachel that she missed out on playing with her friends.
I had plans with my friends, but because you were late, I couldn't go to their house.
When I finally got there, all the other kids were gone. Rachel was standing there, teary-eyed protest. I'm so sorry. Let's go to your friends' houses now.
It's too late. They said they weren't sure if we could play today, so it's canceled.
When it started affecting Rachel's friendships, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I called Susan and firmly said, sorry, but Rachel is missing out on playing with her friends, so please stop calling me to come over from now on. She exploded.
What? I thought you'd want to bond with me, so I was giving you all these chances to help. Anyway, who's more important, me or Rachel?
What? I stood there, dumbfounded, as she yelled at me.
If you're my son's wife, you should prioritize his mother.
Oh, she's someone I can't reason with. That's what I realized. From now on, please ask Mark or call a professional. I sighed and hung up the phone. For a while after that, she left insulting messages on my voicemail. But eventually, whether she got bored or tired of it, they stopped altogether. It was clear that Susan and I didn't get along. I decided that from now on, I would keep our interactions to the bare minimum. I had made that promise to myself, but the other day, when we visited her house during the long weekend, she made yet another request.
Rachel, is your mom's cooking delicious?
During dinner, Susan asked Rachel, who responded with a big smile.
Yes. Mom's cooking is the best in the world. Dad's comes second.
Mark had lived on his own during his college, so he could handle most household chores. On weekends, he would sometimes cook for us.
Second place.
Mark smiled awkwardly at the brutally honest opinion of our 6-year-old. As I watched the innocent exchange between father and daughter, I nervously wondered if Susan would say something strange again. And sure enough, she made an outrageous suggestion.
Abby, would you mind coming over every night to make dinner?
Every night? I froze in place, and she continued with a smile.
When I eat alone, I tend to slack off, and the food tastes bland. I'd like you to come and cook for me, and we can eat together.
Mom, that's too much to ask. Abby has Rachel to take care of. It's not possible.
Mark immediately shut it down, and I sighed in relief. But then Susan sighed dramatically, looking disappointed.
I feel bad for causing Abby so much trouble in the past. I wanted to make things right, so I thought this would be a good way to patch things up.
Mark, sitting next to me, looked uncomfortable. So I offered an alternative. How about you come to our place then? We'd be happy to have you over occasionally. If I had to go through the trouble of cooking and cleaning at her houses, it was much easier to invite her over to ours. But she immediately rejected the idea.
I can't relax and eat properly with Rachel around. I want it to be just the adults.
I swallowed the frustration that was rising in my throat. It was unreasonable to expect a 6-year-old to act like an adult during meals.
How about this then? I'll come over on the weekends and cook dinner. Maybe once every 2 weeks.
Mark suggested, his smile looking a bit forced, and Susan beamed.
That's fine. It's been a while since I've had your cooking, Mark. I'm looking forward to it, and if you can't make it, Abby can come instead, right?
All right, in that case, I'll bring Rachel along too.
Well, I guess that's fine.
After that exchange, we agreed to have dinner with Susan once or twice a month. At first, I couldn't understand why she didn't want to eat with Rachel. It didn't seem like she disliked her. Since the incident at the park, we had banned any outings alone with her. But whenever we all went out together, She would watch Rachel play on the slide with a smile, or happily join in when Rachel played in the sandbox. I realized that, based on some things she'd said to me, she probably just wanted to feel prioritized over her granddaughter. During holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas, Susan would always serve lavish dishes, such as famous restaurant specials or expensive sushi. Other relatives were invited, and it was a lively dinner party. On the other hand, whenever we had meals together, whether dining out or eating at home, I was always busy taking care of Rachel. It seemed Susan, who liked to be the center of attention, wasn't happy about being overlooked. To my surprise, though, our regular dinners with her always ended on a peaceful note without any arguments. Maybe this arrangement could actually work, I started to think. But then something strange began happening. Almost every time after dinner, Susan would get sick.
My stomach feels queasy. I think I have a stomachache. Sorry, I need to use the bathroom.
She would return from the bathroom complaining about diarrhea or nausea. This only happened when I hosted her at our apartment and cooked the meal. At first, I wondered if she was just trying to annoy me, but seeing how pale she looked, it seemed genuine. Susan, let's go to the hospital.
I'm fine. It'll pass soon.
Please don't say that. I'll drive you. There was a general hospital just 5 minutes from our apartment.
Grandma, are you okay? Do you need to go to the doctor if your stomach hurts?
At first, she resisted, but when even Rachel expressed concern, Susan finally agreed. Reluctantly, she let me take her to the hospital. They ran blood tests and an endoscopy, but nothing was wrong. After Susan's exam, for some reason, I was also called into the examination room by the doctor.
Abby, I've checked everything, but there's no sign of illness in Susan. It's not food poisoning either. You and Rachel aren't feeling sick, right?
The doctor, Lily, was a high school classmate of mine. She knew the story of how I met Mark because I'd invited her to our post-wedding dinner. Yes, we're fine, Lily. Lily gave me a look, as if she wanted to say something. What is it?
Oh, nothing. Let's just keep an eye on her for now.
All right. On the way home, Susan sat in the back seat looking down.
I'm sorry, Abby, for making you take me to the hospital.
It's no trouble. Are you feeling better? She gave me a wide smile and said,
I'm happy because you're worried about me. I thought you hated me.
Of course I'm concerned. I didn't hate her really. I just found her difficult. She spoke in a quiet, reflective tone.
I'm sorry for saying something so harsh, like wanting to eat without Rachel. It's just that when a little one is around, I can't chat about my neighborhood gossip, and it felt a bit dull.
Then she smiled gently.
But after actually having dinner with Rachel, I had fun. It's much better than eating alone.
Susan,
I also enjoy having meals with Grandma. She tells such interesting stories.
I chuckled to myself. Most of her interesting stories were celebrity gossip. I wasn't sure it was the best influence on Rachel, but it was certainly better than gossiping about her neighbors. However, things soon took a turn. Not only Susan, but Rachel also started complaining about feeling sick after meals.
Mom, my tummy feels funny.
Abby, me too.
What? Then Rachel and Susan took turns running to the bathroom. But even after that, Rachel came to me in tears.
My tummy hurts. It feels prickly.
Mine too.
I immediately took them to the hospital to see Lily as they endured their pain. Rachel was seen by the pediatrician. Thankfully, after a few trips to the bathroom, they both felt better and their color returned. I anxiously waited for Lily's diagnosis.
Looks like their stomachs are just sensitive, probably from fatigue or stress. That's what the pediatrician said too.
But even as fall came, both Susan and Rachel continued to have stomach issues after meals together. Susan, maybe we should take a break from these dinners for a while. I suggested it a few times, but each time she refused.
I always look forward to these dinners. It's just been bad luck that I haven't felt well. Next time we'll be fine, Abby. Don't worry.
But how could I not worry? They both kept getting sick while I remained perfectly fine. I mentioned it to Mark, but unfortunately he was going on a business trip, so he wouldn't be able to take over the cooking for a while. I was especially worried about Rachel, but I couldn't stop her from eating altogether. Although she was usually back to her cheery self after a few trips to the bathroom, I still felt uneasy. On our sixth visit to the hospital, after Susan had been complaining about stomach problems, Lily conducted urine and blood tests and even performed an endoscopy. Rachel also had an abdominal ultrasound at the pediatrician's. I quietly decided that if nothing showed up, I would consider going to a different hospital. A few days later, we got a call with the results, and I took Susan to the hospital. In the exam room, Lily shared the findings with her.
It seems like stress and fatigue are the culprits again.
Susan shrugged as she left the room. I see. As soon as Susan sat next to me, a nurse called my name. Wondering what was going on, I went into the waiting area where Lily waved me over. She led me to a small room at the end of the hallway, which looked like a storage room. Did they find something bad? I asked, trembling with fear. Lily looked at me seriously and said,
You need to leave your husband and get out of there immediately. When we examined Susan, we found out.
Her words that followed left me in disbelief. I almost screamed, instinctively covering my mouth with my hand. All the events of the past flashed through my mind like a movie reel. I clenched my fists and bit my lip, struggling to contain the overwhelming anger rising within me. No matter how much she is Mark's mother, I can't forgive her for doing something like this. She's not getting away with it. Susan, you better be prepared. Following Lily's advice, I dropped Susan off at her house and immediately prepared the divorce papers. That night, I told Mark everything that had happened once he returned home from work. He sat in shock, silent for a while.
I can't believe it. Mom would harm Rachel?
You don't want to believe it, but it's the truth.
All right.
Mark furrowed his brows, clearly upset. After a long discussion, he agreed to our divorce. The next morning, I submitted the signed divorce papers. I packed up clothes and essentials for myself and Rachel into my suitcase and moved into a temporary furnished apartment. Luckily, I had been working full-time before our marriage, so I had enough savings to support us for a while. After things settled down, I planned to find a rental apartment closer to the daycare and my workplace. For now, it was enough to have escaped from Susan's clutches. Rachel may not be my biological daughter, but she's precious to me. I have to protect her.
Mom, is Dad coming later?
Rachel asked curiously as I unpacked her clothes in the living room. Not wanting to worry her, I forced a smile. Dad's really busy with his work, so we'll be living in different places for a while. But don't worry, you'll see him soon. Rachel tilted her head in an innocent gesture, her expression puzzled. The thought of the day when she would learn the truth made my heart ache. Dad will send your toys soon. Just wait a little longer, okay?
Okay,
I had already asked Mark to send our things once I found a new apartment. After dropping Rachel off at daycare, I was searching online for rental apartments when Susan called me.
So, you divorced Mark?
Susan tried to keep a calm tone, but her voice was clearly excited.
You two seem to be getting along so well. It's such a shame. What happened?
Well, as I hesitated to answer, she continued with a firmer tone.
Tell me where you're moving. And of course, you're going to let me see Rachel, right? She's my only grandchild after all.
Her audacity made my blood boil. Does she not realize she's the reason we divorced? I see. Are you free next Saturday? Let's have dinner together again.
Oh, really? Rachel would come too, right?
Yes. Come to the address I'll give you. Delighted, she hung up the phone. I immediately called my parents, explained our situation. After expressing their anger, my parents readily agreed to look after Rachel on the day Susan was coming over. I had no intention of ever letting her see Rachel again. When she arrived and saw my tense expression at the door, her eyes widened. Please come in.
Thank you. Where's Rachel?
She was invited for a sleepover at her friend's place from daycare. I lied smoothly, and she accepted it without question.
Oh, what a shame. But I suppose it's nice for us adults to chat sometimes.
Relieved that she didn't seem upset, I quietly exhaled. I served the soup and simmered vegetables at the counter, and she only placed her portion on the dining table before sitting in her usual spot. I joined her, calmly sitting down, and we began eating.
So, what's the reason for your divorce? I can't imagine Mark being unfaithful or gambling, and he's certainly not in debt.
She looked up quickly with a crumb of food on her mouth as she pondered over her side dish.
I've got it. The problem is you, Abby.
What?
You must have been cheating, right?
Her eyes sparkled as she leaned forward over the table, pressing me.
You've been buying a lot of clothes with your own money, haven't you? Maybe you secretly love gambling and racked up some debt. And don't think I don't know how you pretend to adore Rachel, but scold her harshly behind closed doors.
She chuckled to herself, but I shook my head in disbelief. I've done none of that. I haven't cheated, gambled, or taken on any debt. And I love Rachel like my own daughter, which is why I discipline her properly.
Oh, stop lying. I have proof.
She laughed and proudly showed me her phone screen. It was a picture of me, arm in arm with an unknown man, about to enter a hotel. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Well, anyone can edit photos these days. You claiming to be bad with computers and phones was a complete lie.
What?
Her face stiffened as I continued. This is clearly amateur work. The people are cut out from the background, and my shadow's going the wrong way. Anyone would see this as a fake.
Oh,
Susan covered her mouth, realizing she had slipped up, and hastily denied it.
this picture may be fake, but I know for a fact you were cheating.
She raised her voice, glaring at me.
I saw you with my own eyes, getting cozy with some guy. I can tell Mark all about it anytime.
I see. You pulled the same stunt with his ex-wife, didn't you? Her eyes widened in shock.
What are you talking about?
Emma, Mark's ex-wife. You told him she had an affair, abandoned Rachel, and ran off with another man. But the truth is, you bullied her out and fed Mark a pack of lies, didn't you? Susan's face twisted with rage.
You've met his ex-wife?
Who knows? I smirked, lifting the corner of my mouth. and she turned red with fury. She shot up from her seat, grabbed my shoulders, and spit out her words.
That woman tricked Mark with her sweet, innocent act. I know what I'm talking about.
That's not true.
The door flew open, and Emma stood there, tall and confident. Susan was stunned, her mouth agape. She clenched her teeth and glared at both of us before rounding on me.
You two were in on this together.
Please, stop with the accusations. I sighed, half exasperated, as I explained. About a year after I married Mark, I took Rachel to a local children's center. That's where I met Emma, working there. As I glanced at Emma's gentle profile, I continued. After Rachel asked her where the books were, Emma started tearing up. When I asked why, Emma told me she was Rachel's mom. You can imagine my shock.
You ignored my order to move out of the state? I told you to never see Rachel again.
Though Emma flinched momentarily at Susan's monstrous anger, she quickly straightened and, despite stammering, spoke back.
I couldn't do that. I've done nothing wrong.
Emma lowered her voice.
I started working at the center because I knew Mark or Rachel might come there. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could see her again.
Emma's voice trembled as she continued.
One day, I saw Abby bringing Rachel. That's how I found out Mark had remarried. It was a shock, but seeing how attached Rachel was to Abby, I realized she was in good hands.
Emma looked so much like Rachel. I immediately believed her when she said she was Rachel's mom. I shifted my gaze from Emma to Susan. For the past 3 years, I've seen Emma interact with other children at the center. I can say for certain that she is not the kind of person who would abandon her daughter for an affair. I stared directly at Susan as I said this, and her eyes narrowed with frustration. She glared at me with burning anger for a moment, but then she averted her eyes and let out a long sigh.
Mark has terrible taste in women. The first one gives me a granddaughter, and the second one dares to stand up to me. He would have been better off never marrying and just living with me.
Her crazed outburst, with veins bulging at her temples, sent a shiver down my spine. I've always wondered, Susan, do you not love Rachel? Her eyes bulged in response.
Of course, I don't love her. She looks just like that woman.
Susan pointed at Emma, her face twisted in rage as she hurled her insults.
I told her to have a boy who looked like Mark. Instead, year after year, Rachel just looks more and more like her mother. I couldn't stand it.
Then she turned to me and asked,
Didn't it bother you, seeing Rachel looking more and more like Mark's ex?
Not at all. I think she's getting cuter by the day, and I'm excited to see what the future holds for her. My words brought tears to Emma's eyes. And honestly, while I've heard of mothers-in-law who adore their sons, it's abnormal for a grandmother to poison her own granddaughter. I spoke with anger, confronting Susan. I think at first you enjoyed having people worry about you, but your resentment toward Rachel grew, and eventually you poisoned her too.
What? That's ridiculous. What are you talking about?
She stammered, suddenly flustered, a nervous laugh escaping her.
It was stress-related diarrhea, right? No matter how much I disliked her, I wouldn't do something that awful.
Oh, but you did the same thing to me.
Emma said with a shaky laugh, her shoulders trembling.
When I cooked for you, you got sick, and then you screamed at me in the hospital, saying, "Are you trying to kill me?"
Lily, the doctor saw everything. Lily, the one who examined you, she's a classmate of mine from high school.
What?
Susan was left speechless. She was worried about me and told me to keep an eye on you. That's why I told Mark everything and got a divorce, to keep you away from Rachel. Susan blinked rapidly, struggling to find words before stammering a response.
But you and the doctor can say whatever you want, but where's the proof?
True, you probably already got rid of the laxatives you used. Seeing a flicker of relief in her eyes, I delivered the final blow. But Susan, I caught everything on camera. Her face turned ghostly pale. She didn't ask what, which meant she knew exactly what I was talking about. But I told her anyway. You sprinkled laxatives into Rachel's and your dinner while I was in the bathroom, didn't you? Next to me, Emma gasped. I was skeptical when Lily suggested installing a hidden camera. I didn't want to believe a grandmother would do such a thing to her own granddaughter. But when I saw the footage, I was devastated. Emma, her eyes welling with tears, spoke through gritted teeth.
How could you do something so horrible to my precious daughter? I won't forgive you.
Emma gave her a hateful glare, and Susan turned away in a sulk.
It's your fault for not respecting me in the first place.
What?
You're supposed to respect your elders, but all you and Mark care about is that grandkid.
She glared at me, her eyes bloodshot, and continued to rant.
I thought since you weren't Rachel's real mother, you'd finally start prioritizing me. But instead, you've been treating Rachel like she's your own daughter. I hated it.
Her words made my head pound. This woman is truly insane. So that's why you poisoned Rachel, isn't it? I was boiling with rage. I glared at Susan, my voice trembling. To put a 6-year-old child through that kind of pain is unforgivable. You don't deserve to call yourself her grandmother. No matter how much Emma and I pleaded, it was clear nothing would get through to her. Susan, showing no remorse, leaned on her hand and sneered.
I'm done. I'm actually relieved to be rid of a noisy daughter-in-law and a nuisance of a granddaughter. Besides, Mark came back to me. I'll just spend the rest of my life enjoying my time with him.
She cackled, but then her phone rang. She eagerly pulled it out of her bag and answered.
Mark, darling, what's up? I'm with Abby and your ex-wife right now.
Hoping to hear him criticize us, she put the call on speaker. But instead, a cold voice echoed through the room.
Mom, I'm cutting ties with you.
What?
She froze, still holding the phone.
Why?
Her voice trembled as she anxiously asked.
I know everything you did to Emma and Rachel. I've been listening to this entire conversation because Abby was recording it and sending it to my phone. I also saw the footage from the hidden camera.
Susan let out a scream. Her face drained of color. She frantically tried to explain.
That's not true. I was tricked by Abby. I haven't done anything wrong.
I've already submitted everything to the police, so officers should be on their way. Don't run, and accept your punishment like an adult.
Wait, Mark.
Still holding the phone, she stared blankly in shock. Just then, the doorbell rang. I answered the intercom, and 2 police officers appeared on the camera. After unlocking the door, they soon entered my apartment. I led them to the dining room, where they approached Susan.
We have reason to believe you've committed assault on your granddaughter, and we'd like you to come with us to the station.
Assault? Don't be ridiculous. It was just a little joke.
She gave a strained laugh, but the officers responded calmly.
All right, you can explain that at the station.
Don't you dare touch me. I'll sue you. And you, Abby. Just wait and see what happens to you.
She hurled insults at us and the officers, but it was futile. They restrained her on both sides and escorted her out. As the patrol car drove away, Emma and I exchanged relieved smiles. Later, I invited Mark over after work to meet Emma. The two of them, seeing each other for the first time in years, looked a bit bewildered. Mark apologized to her first.
I believed everything my mom said and never really listened to Emma. I'm sorry.
No, I was wrong too. I left Rachel behind and ran away without talking to you properly.
Emma apologized, tears in her eyes.
Are you doing well now?
Yes, this summer I'm getting married to my fiancé.
Emma smiled happily, and Mark looked relieved.
That's great. Congratulations.
Actually, I have a favor to ask. Would it be okay if I see Rachel sometimes?
Mark looked at me, so I added, "She's her real mom, so of course I said it's fine, but I wanted your permission too."
I always planned to let Emma see Rachel whenever she wanted, as long as she reached out.
Mark nodded.
But let's wait until Rachel's in elementary school to tell her the truth about her mother.
I agree. That seems best. Emma smiled gratefully at our words, tears streaming down her cheeks.
Yes, we'll do that. Thank you so much.
We promised to meet again soon with Rachel, and then we all parted ways. I went to pick up Rachel from my parents' house, and Mark and Emma each returned to their homes. Susan, who had arrogantly assumed she'd be released soon, was deemed to have committed a serious crime against her young granddaughter. After a brief detention, she was sentenced to 3 years of probation. Though she avoided prison, a crime is still a crime. The news quickly spread throughout the town, and she was cut off by her friends. Living in the same neighborhood became unbearable, so she considered selling the houses and moving. But when she consulted a real estate agent, they advised her against it. The 50-year-old house was practically worthless, and the narrow plot of land had little value. Plus, moving into an apartment would mean paying rent, which wasn't feasible on her pension. Reluctantly, she gave up on moving. But every time she stepped outside, she was ignored by the townspeople and became the target of gossip. Recently, one of Mark's relatives went to check on her at his request. They found her eyes glazed over, eating a frozen pizza in a dark room with the windows closed and the room trashed. A little while later, I moved with Rachel into a rented apartment. Although it was farther from my workplace, it was closer to her daycare. It prioritized her attending the same elementary school as her friends. I had considered reconciling with Mark, but the thought that his mother might still try to get close to Rachel terrified me, so we stayed divorced. I was granted custody, and Mark provided child support every month. Even though it felt awkward to accept, Mark insisted, saying, "It's my responsibility as her father." Now, I've transitioned from part-time work to a full-time position. Whenever I have to work weekends or stay late, my mom drives 30 minutes from her house to watch Rachel. Despite the circumstances, I still care deeply for Mark, and Rachel loves her dad. We make a point of spending time together every weekend, whether going out or having meals at home. I've also stayed in touch with Lily, who has been a great support. We try to meet for dinner when our schedules allow, and venting about work to each other always feels refreshing. Rachel, now more assertive, sometimes throws tantrums at the store when she wants candy or refuses to clean up her toys, which can be frustrating. But despite all that, I love my daughter, even though we aren't related by blood. I plan to continue raising her with all my love I can give, consulting with Emma when needed along the way.